Hello everybody, this is Marty from Dawgs blog. In the noontime report of the morning session of the Frank Carson et al. Trial, this is February 19th, 2019. It's court scheduled for 9:30 a.m. this morning. Judge arrived right at 9:30. Judge was on the bench at 9:45. They had some issues to talk about prior to bringing the jury up. In fact, it's a regard to the issue that ended on Friday, that PRAVEEN Singh's previous testimony in federal court that he denied happened. It was stricken testimony, and Marlissa Ferrer is claiming that it's not allowed, it's stricken, so it doesn't exist. Judge Zuniga was agreeing with that on Friday. Today, after reading all the case law and some of the whatever else is involved that she read, she admitted that she was wrong in regards to it's a previous statement is what it's considered, not necessarily testimony, but previous statement. The testimony is stricken, but the statement is not. Testimony, it can be used in as for impeachment purposes, just not as testimony itself. It's going to be considered a hearing and not in the federal court trial. Jai Gohel wanted to confirm with the court that the setting of the testimony can be used also. It's under oath and he was testifying in court under oath, can be used. Judge Zuniga, reading case law in regard to the testimony and inconsistent statements, the jury can be informed it was a prior hearing. Percy Martinez says the jury has to hear some of the content of that testimony. Marlissa Ferrer again objected under foundation. She said that the district attorney's office has contacted, who was a U.S. attorney at the time, is now a federal judge, and he cannot provide identification of who was on the stand on that day. He doesn't recall. She said whoever was a witness that took a stand that day in federal court, so it is unknown who was present at the hearing testifying. She's still trying to do a little bit of fancy lawyering there as to who is actually doing the testifying in that case. Judge Zuniga trying to locate the transcript of that testimony to see exactly what was said. Marlissa Ferrer said the case citation, she has no doubt they have to show no doubt who was testifying. This witness saying it was never him that was testifying. He's not saying he didn't recall, he's saying he never testified is what he's saying, so they have to prove that it was him. She says she's not denying what was said, she's just saying maybe it wasn't him. The district attorney's office did turn over the transcripts on the information to the defense in discovery as per Brady, but says there's no proof who it actually was. They did it out of abundance of caution. Judge Zuniga noted that just because the judge was contacted and he can't remember specifically it was PRAVEEN Singh himself is not persuasive. She says there's so many people that they come into contact with, witnesses and victims and etc. There's so many they're not expected to remember specific people. Judge Zuniga then was reading the transcript, and apparently she was reading the wrong passages in this transcript. There was lots of confusion, and apparently there was another case that was involved there was a transcript of, and she was reading the wrong one and started having questions about things and then realized it was on the wrong transcript. Judge Zuniga is saying, no, now that PRAVEEN Singh has said he did not testify, he can't necessarily be impeached, but in reality, yes, he can. Marlissa Ferrer says PRAVEEN Singh has immunity and a statute of limitation has run since this was in November of 2009. He has no reason to lie. Bottom line, Was it him? Jai Gohill argued it's amazing that Marlissa Ferreira met or has read the reports by Kurt Bunch saying that he investigated Praveen Singh's claims that he was a Fresno Police Department reserve, and they actually investigated and disputed what Praveen Singh had been telling everybody. There's a report written, but there is, just because there's no identification check prior to testimony, but doesn't mean there's not reports that coincides with that testimony. He's known Frank Carson for years. He took administration classes of justice classes, supposedly. He worked in Frank Carson's office, supposedly. Marlissa Ferreira and Kurt Bunch are sitting in court right now denying it's him. Is outrageous. It's very clear it was him through their own investigation. Judge Inigo noted, the court, I did have the witness identify by himself, like every court does, by oath, and they say who they are and they spell their name. She also asked if Kurt Bunch ever confirmed the Fresno connection, and Marlissa Ferreira said they confirmed there was no Fresno connection. No law school either in any of the other claims that he had made. Judge Inigo cannot say at this time it was not him, at least at this point. Jai Gohill says Kurt Bunch report says Praveen Singh applied for admission to Humphreys, and there was he was telling people that he was going to law school. Judge Inigo said be allowed to say that he did say that it was another hearing and he had lied in that hearing. So finally the jury was brought up at 11:04 a.m. So they've been downstairs for over an hour and a half. And Percy Martinez and Praveen Singh was on the stand and asked him if he ever represented himself as a police officer. He says, no, not a police officer, never been. He says, have you ever done that in a hearing? He said, no. On November 8, 2011, he asked him, as a reserve police officer? He said, no. Reported as a private investigator? He said, no. Represented himself as a reserve for the Fresno Police Department? He said, no. 7 years with Fresno Police Department as a reserve? He said, no. He asked him if he testified knowing Frank Carson since he was 2 years old? He said, no. And these are all questions in regards to what he had testified in that hearing. Testified he worked at Frank Carson's office as an intern? He said, no. He testified he was in law school? He said, no. He testified he went to Modesto JC? He said, no. Testified he took law enforcement classes? He said, no. Did he tell his family he was a reserve with Fresno PD? He said, no. Did he represent himself to other friends or family that he worked as a law enforcement officer? He said, no. Did he ever own any uniforms for Fresno Police Department? He said, no. But did he own a flak vest? He said, no. Did he ever go in uniform to an eviction? He said, no. Percy Martinez went through a list of people that he may know. He said he does not know them. It was 2 or 3 people. He's asked if he owned a home in Natomas in 2013. There was an objection by Marlissa Ferreira, and she said it was based on the court's ruling, didn't want to say too much in front of the jury. There's a sidebar. So they moved on to something else until they get some documentation in to prove what they're talking about. Percy Martinez asked him if he was involved in an eviction of a Divet Singh. He did not recall. Also note that after that sidebar, which the Praveen Singh's attorney was involved in, that's Jared Jordan, he took him Praveen Singh outside for a minute, talked to him. And when he came back in, he started saying, "I do not recall," instead of just denying. He said, asked if a report would help his memory, or would not. He said a report would not help his memory, but we'll look at it after the judge kind of coerced him a little bit. He says it does not refresh. He says he did a lot of evictions, so he couldn't remember that one specifically. In an interview in 9/13 of 2013 by Kurt Bunch and John Evers, he didn't recall, but maybe he refreshed with a report. He said it did refresh his memory on 4/26 of 2019 in court, Department 2. And the last thing I talked to, it just kind of dropped, and they moved on to something else, and I don't know why they did that. Maybe they're waiting for more paperwork. I don't know. Then he talked about 4/26 of 2019. He was in court, 2018 actually, in court, Department 2. He talked to Marlissa Ferrer after court. He did not recall. He refreshed with a report transcript, and he said, yes, that does help him remember. He was provided with immunity information in regards to testifying. And he actually didn't actually talk to Marlissa Ferrer. He talked to Steve Jacobson, who had talked to Marlissa Ferrer. Other than the grant of immunity, were they willing to offer more? And he was willing to offer more than just if he got more, to get more of a deal and get more than immunity off his cases. Steve Jacobson also apparently told Marlissa Ferrer that. He said that he had direct evidence that would put Frank Carson away all day long. He said, yes, he did say that. Evidence was a black bag that he was in his possession at his McHenry Avenue business, which was a plumbing business.
Are you serious?
On McHenry Avenue. He had a bag about 9 months at that location. Frank Carson, he said, gave him the bag 2 years prior to that, 2 years prior to Frank Carson going into custody. But then he also said that he had had that bag 30 days prior to Frank Carson going into custody. Now he's sticking with the 30-day statement. He has never talked to Frank Carson again after August of 2015 when Frank Carson was taken into custody. He hasn't talked to Frank Carson since up to this day. He said he moved into 940 McHenry sometime in 2016, unknown month. In 2018, he had the bag at McHenry. Never told Frank Carson where the bag was at McHenry at his business. So Frank Carson never knew where the bag was. On 4/26 of 18, he told investigators he had the bag of direct evidence. He never gave investigators the bag, nor did they ever do a search warrant to retrieve the bag. Never told investigators about a bag at a break-in in May of 2018. And then after the break-in, the bag was taken. And this is also where one of his employees was sleeping in the business, received some wounds from a shotgun pellet in that break-in. He never talked about the bag prior to that date. He was asked, did Marlissa promise to talk to the U.S. attorney for a deal? There was an objection that was sustained. Steve Jacobson said he would not talk. Said he would talk to Marlissa Ferrer and the U.S. attorney. He did not recall if he asked him to do that or not. He says, and he refreshed with the report. It does not refresh. And again, they repeated he talked to Steve Jacobson outside in the hallway after court on April 26, 2018. Marlissa Ferrer granted immunity, gave him the information for granted immunity, and told Steve Jacobson of the immunity. On 5/6 of 2018, he had called Steve Jacobson and he left messages and such. The bag was missing that was taken in invasion of his business. He asked if the black bag was stolen. He said no. He had left, again, they were asking about he had left messages on 5/6/18. He said no one had come to get the bag, and without the bag, he made a statement to the law enforcement he would have to testify as to the bag now that the bag is missing. Steve Jacobson asked if the information had been shared with Modesto Police Department. He did not recall if he told some of the Modesto Police Department was investigating the invasion of his business that there was evidence in the Frank Carson that he was to testify about. Again, he was reading transcripts. He said he didn't really reading it does not help, but then relents, and he said it wouldn't help, and then he relents and reads a report. He still does not recall. He was asked if he ever induced anyone to take something at gunpoint from anyone. He said no. Ever solicited anyone to use a firearm in a crime? He said no. And he also asked, Percy Martinez asked him if he offered to wear a wire and approach the outlaws. He said no, he never did that. It was a little before noon there. They had to get the rest of the documents into the courtroom that they wanted to refer to on some of this stuff. So a few minutes before 12, we broke for lunch. So they're getting transcripts and stuff to further in some of this stuff that he's denying or doesn't recall and stuff. So we're back at 1:30. It's getting interesting what he keeps denying and says doesn't happen, but there's a transcript from a federal court that says he did testify, but he's saying he didn't. So it's going to get interesting on some of this stuff. So we'll be back at 1:30. Don't forget the podcast tonight.